Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. So Canon just launched the EOS R8 and it looks pretty cool on paper. So there's some review videos out there. I've watched the review videos. I've heard what people have to say. I don't have the camera in my hands, obviously, but in this video, we're gonna take a look at the hardware specs of the R8. We're gonna take a look at the photo specs of the R8. We're gonna take a look at the video specs of the R8, and we're gonna determine whether or not this new camera will dethrone the EOS R as the best bang for the buck camera in Canon's lineup. So let's take a look at the specs. All right, so the thing with this camera is you have to kind of look at it from the right perspective. And initially when I saw the specs, I was a little underwhelmed and I thought, oh my God, Canon could have done so many things better. But then I realized you gotta look at this camera from the price point that it exists in, right? It's not a $5,000 camera, it's not a $4,000 camera, it's a $1,500 camera. So we have to take a look at it with a grain of salt when comparing it to, let's say, an R5, because an R5, obviously, if it has the same specs as an R5, you know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense. So for a $1,500 camera, this thing is absolutely fantastic. I'm gonna talk more about my personal thoughts about this camera at the end of the video, but there are some caveats, obviously. So let's start with the hardware specs. We're dealing with a full frame CMOS sensor, which is awesome. Apparently it's the same sensor that's in the EOS R6, which is, the R6 is right below the R5 in terms of like the hierarchy of cameras. Obviously R1 is going to be the best when it comes out, obviously. And by the way, every other camera brand, mirrorless manufacturer of cameras, that didn't make any sense, but you know what I'm saying, has a flagship camera except for Canon. So Canon, what's going on? Where's the R1? They don't have IBIS in this camera, which is, I don't know, neither here nor there. It's a lighter camera, so you can put it on a gimbal, you can put it on a smaller gimbal, makes it a lot easier to use on a gimbal for video work. You do have digital IS and digital IS enhanced in the camera, which crops into the frame a little bit. You also have lens IS, which is pretty good. But I feel like Canon kind of missed the boat here with no IBIS in this camera, simply because there's a whole bunch of like videographers, YouTubers, that kind of thing who want to vlog, do run and gun video, and the lack of IBIS kind of makes it a little difficult. In my opinion, it would have been a lot better if it did have IBIS, so take that with a grain of salt, however you want to look at it. From a video perspective, I think it's a little bit of a drawback. From a photo perspective, I don't think it makes much difference. I mean, look, I've said this before and people get angry at me for saying it, but IBIS in photography only works if you're perfectly still and the subject is perfectly still, because if you're moving or they're moving, then IBIS for photography doesn't really do much. So yeah, no IBIS. In terms of the EVF, it's got a 2.36 million dot EVF. I mean, it's obviously not the highest, it's not the lowest, but you know, I think it'll get the job done, and at this price point, I think it's fine. All right, so let's talk about card slots, and in this case, there's only one slot. And I get it, it's you know, it's a cheaper camera, it's not gonna have two card slots, but how much more expensive would have the camera been or to produce if it had a second card slot? I mean, might as well just put two card slots in there. What's the point of having just one? I think that was a bad move for Canon. Now, in terms of workaround, because I have been using the EOS R as a secondary backup camera on weddings and commercial shoots and things like that. And of course, the fear is that a card corrupts in the camera and then you have no backups. So that's why you want two card slots. So the trick or the workaround with that is just switch out your cards every half hour or so, or every certain number of shots, or whatever the case may be. Just switch out your cards, get a bunch of memory cards, and every half an hour switch it out. So if your card does get corrupted, you're only going to lose a certain portion of your shoot, not the whole thing. So there's a little workaround. So yeah, you can use the R8 in commercial settings, just, you know, switch the cards out often, just in case. Fingers crossed. Next up, we have weather sealing. Now, the R8 has what I would call basic weather sealing. It's not going to be as, you know, tight as the R5, for example, or R6 or R1 when it comes out. But if you're out there and it's, you know, sprinkling a little bit of rain, I think you'll be fine. But if it's really a torrential downpour, you know, maybe the R8 isn't the best camera to use for that kind of thing. Now, the thing with the R8 is that it can focus in -6.5 EV, so you can focus in darker situations. So that is an advantage, especially, I mean, if you're thinking between the R7 and the R8, the R7 is APS-C. APS-C sensors struggle in low light. The R8 obviously will do better in low light. So if you're looking for a low light camera, the R8 is, you know, the better choice. Plus the fact that you can focus in lower light is definitely a positive. So for low light photography, the R8 would be a better choice. All right, so dials. This is a bit of a mini rant here. The R7 over there has 2 dials. The R5 has 3 dials, and the R8 also has 2 dials. So Canon, if you're listening, just put 3 dials on all your cameras. It's just a little plastic wheel. You turn it, it's inexpensive, it's cheap, it doesn't cost a lot of money, and it just makes the photographer's life so much easier. You have 1 dial for shutter speed, 1 for aperture, 1 for ISO. So when you're working, you just turn whatever finger you want and you set your exposure without thinking about it. And the thing is with the camera, and I've said this so many times, is the best camera is the one that just gets out of your way. So you can just use it without even thinking about it. And 3 dials makes it so much easier when you're thinking about what buttons to press and this and that, and it just gets in the way and it's frustrating. Like I've had, all right, future me interrupting the video because I just noticed something as I was editing. This is the EOS R7, and you can see right here beside the record button, there's a dedicated ISO button. So you can hit the ISO button and change your ISO because there isn't a 3rd wheel on the camera. So the R8, no ISO button, which is kind of annoying. I think that just makes the whole process of shooting pictures and changing your ISOs a little more awkward. Yes, you have the clicky wheel, which you can set to ISO, and I'm sure you could program one of the buttons on the top of the R8 to change ISO, but the fact that there is no dedicated ISO button makes things a little frustrating. I'm used to the R5, and obviously whatever camera you pick up, you'll get used to it. You'll figure out your muscle memory and stuff, but it would be nice if all the Canon cameras in the whole Canon lineup all had 3 dials. So professionals like me, for example, we could pick up the R5, and if we want to pick up the R8 or R7, we can just put it in our hands and use it as a secondary camera without having to like relearn where all the buttons are. It's frustrating, it annoys me. And that brings me to the other thing that's really frustrating. There's no joystick on the R8. Look, if Fuji can figure out how to put a little tiny, okay, let's focus here. Fuji can figure out how to put a little tiny joystick here on the back of the X100V. I'm sure you could have figured out a way to put a joystick on the back of the R8. Kind of a bummer that there's no joystick. It makes things really handy for getting around, changing focus points. However, the touch to focus using your thumb on the back of the screen works really well on Canon cameras. And there's some additional functionality on the LCD, so you can actually tap the screen and the camera will jump between different objects that it thinks you want to focus on in the shot. So that's kind of cool. All right, so this is your typical battery that you get in the R5, R6 Mark II, R7, but the R8 gets that smaller, more compact battery. And I've looked at the grip on the R8 and I've looked at the grip on the R7, and there's not much difference. I mean, Canon could have put this proper battery in the R8. Like, I don't know why. You have a Digix processor, you have a full frame sensor, you have a lot of good quality features, and then you go cheap on the battery and put a smaller battery in there, which is, I don't know. Like, I was really interested in buying an R8, but it's that battery size. It's now I have to buy a bunch more of these. I already have a bunch of these for all the cameras I do own, but now I have to buy these other types of batteries, which is just more weight and more stuff to carry, especially if I want to take the R8 as a backup for me for wedding photography. Now I have to get a bunch of batteries to use it as a backup camera. It just doesn't make any sense. So looking at it from like a professional that wants to buy an R8 as a backup camera, it's definitely, I don't know, it's a roadblock, it's a speed bump, it's a hindrance. But if you're just looking into getting into photography and you're looking at the R8 as your first camera, I think it works well. I mean, you get a decent number of shots. It's going to chew through video. If you're shooting slow-mo video and stuff like that, you're going to drain your batteries pretty fast. So if you do buy the R8, I would suggest buying a 2nd or 3rd battery for that camera just so you have enough juice to get you through the day. Okay, so one of the things I've really grown to love about Canon cameras is the shutter comes down when the camera is off. The R7 has that feature, the R has that feature, the R5 has that feature, and it saved me so much time in terms of like dust getting on the sensor and then cleaning the sensor and then editing out dust spots and stuff like that. So I don't know why the R8 doesn't have it. I mean, maybe it doesn't have a shutter mechanism, which we'll talk about in the photography section, but maybe that's why there's no shutter down option. But it's when you're changing lenses, you turn off the camera, the shutter comes down on the R, and you don't have to worry about dust. And if you're shooting, let's say, a wedding in a dusty wedding hall, that's a huge plus. So yeah. All right, so now let's talk about the photography and videography stuff, starting with photography. And we're filming now with a 15 to 35 millimeter. We were filming with a 28 to 70, and we're still using the Nisi V&D filter, which a review video for that's coming out. And we're also using the Nisi mist filter, 1/8 video about that right over there. So yeah, photography, we have the 24.2 megapixel sensor, which is really nice. We have dual pixel autofocus with a lot of the more advanced autofocus features, which is really nice. A lot of the other reviewers who've been reviewing this camera say that the autofocus is blazing fast and it's super accurate, which is nice to see. So thank you, Canon, for that. Now, when it comes to color science, you get that nice Canon color science in the R8, but is Canon color science really what it's cracked out to be? I know that the white balance, the auto white balance settings, if you set the cameras to auto white balance, you get different results. So the R5 and the R3 have the best color science. The R6, I'm not sure about the R6 Mark II, but I know the R6 kind of shifted towards a yellow tint to the photos, and the EOS R shifted towards green. So, I mean, yeah, color science, Canon, I don't know. They've been kind of hit and miss with some of the cameras. I think they're trying to figure out how to, I don't know, program the sensors in the mirrorless world, and I don't know what the situation is, but the color science hasn't been pinpoint accurate and consistent with all the cameras. So hopefully the R8 has good color science. Now, when it comes to frame rate, the R8 shoots at 6 frames a second, which is pretty good. You can do a 30 frames per second raw burst, which is pretty good, and that's 14-bit raw from what I understand. And if you go into electronic shutter, which is pretty much all the shots, because the R8 doesn't have a shutter. That's one of the caveats with this camera, is it doesn't have an actual mechanical shutter. Weird. I don't know why Canon didn't put that in there. As far as I'm concerned, they should have, but it has an electronic shutter that can shoot at 40 frames a second. Now, the problem with that is, yes, you can shoot blazing fast, 40 frames a second. The readout speeds from the sensor are slow. So if you're shooting anything that's moving fast, like, I don't know, a bird flapping its wings, a car, motorcycle, baseball swing, golf swing, maybe even a pitcher throwing a ball, you're gonna get this weird warpy effect, a rolling shutter effect in your images if you're shooting things that are moving fast. So you can shoot 40 frames a second, but if you're capturing something that's moving really fast, it might not be the best choice. All right, and that kind of takes care of the photography side, pretty straightforward. But there's one thing I want to mention, is that I was watching the Peter McKinnon review on this camera, and he said this.
We zoom in on the shot here, looking at Tristan Timber casting this line. It looks pretty good. It's pretty sharp. Now, I did use a 50mm 1.2, so that's going to help with the sharpness. That added a bit of chromatic aberration. That's the lens. It's not R5 sharp. It's not R3 sharp. It's R8 sharp. And in many instances, looking at the full picture, it looks great. You wouldn't look at this and think, wow, that's soft focus. But when you do zoom in, you notice things.
Now, what exactly does that mean? Is it like the 45 megapixel sensor of the R5, when you shrink things down, looks sharper? I mean, this is 24 megapixels on the R8. Is it not as sharp? Is there a stronger anti-aliasing filter? Is this some kind of Canon cripple hammer stuff? What exactly does it mean that it's not as sharp? Now, I know the R7 obviously isn't as sharp as the R5, but we're dealing with APS-C versus full frame, so there's a loss in resolution there. But where does the R8 fit into this? Because that's also a full frame sensor. So it's just something to think about. I don't know what this means. Obviously, we'll have to get an R8 in my hand and test things out. And maybe there's some other YouTubers that are going to make videos on that. But I thought that was kind of interesting, and it's kind of got the ball bouncing around in my head a little bit. I want to know exactly what that means. All right, let's move on to video. Alrighty, so video. You can shoot 6K oversampled 4K, which is awesome. I think that should give you better quality video than the R, which is definitely a plus. But you're dealing with the smaller battery, not the regular normal size battery, so your battery's going to drain a lot faster. So if you want to get into video with the R8, definitely look into getting more batteries, or a better option would be to get a dummy battery that you can plug into the mains. And I think you can also use USB-C power into the R8 to record video, so you can get a nice big USB-C battery pack and probably record longer video if you're into long form video. You can shoot 180 frames per second with the R8, which is pretty incredible, but only in full HD mode, so that's 1080p. I mean, that's a good thing, it's a nice feature, but you have other brands like Fuji, which do 240 frames per second already, so it would be nice if we had 240 frames per second in the R8 as well. That would have been a lot of fun. And the R8 also has the new focus breathing compensation in the menu. So, you know, when you rack focus, the lens kind of breathes a little bit, zooms in and out. So what happens is the camera will crop in camera when it's recording the video and cut out those parts where you're focus breathing, which is good and it's bad. I mean, you can also do that in post, just zoom in a little bit and you're done. But R8 does have that. So if that's something you're interested in, there you go. All right, so let's talk about video codecs. And from what I can tell, you can get IPB and IPB Lite on the R8 as well as the R7. But just like the R7, there is no all-eye. So if you want all-eye, you're gonna have to pay more money and buy a higher-end camera system. But if you're thinking that just because you don't have all-eye, your video footage is gonna suffer, it won't. If you're shooting for YouTube, if you're shooting for Instagram Reels, TikToks, that kind of thing, IPB and even IPB Lite is fine. It's more than enough because those platforms will compress your video anyway, so you're gonna lose a lot of sharpness. So there's no sense in recording an all-eye for YouTube and TikTok and Instagram. Now, the other thing with the R8 is you get C-Log 3, which is awesome. So if you wanna shoot in log, 10-bit, you have that option. You can do that with the R8, so thank you for that, Canon. It would have been nice if this camera could shoot all-eye. I don't see why it can't, and I don't see why the R7 can't either. It has a Digic X processor, so it's definitely capable of processing all that, because the R5 that we're recording on right now has a Digic X processor and it can do all-eye. So yeah, anyway, enough. That's a little mini rant. Okay, this is more hardware, but it's also kind of video too. The R8 has that new MI2 hot shoe, which allows you to attach different things to the camera, so you can get 4-channel audio input, which is kind of cool if that's what you're into, recording audio from different sources with the R8. And finally, the R8 is capable of being used as a webcam, which is, I think, kind of par for the course for cameras right now, but that's awesome. You can stream with it if you'd like to. All right, there we go. We get a little artificial sunset light here, created with a reflection in a mirror. But anyway, let's talk about the R8 and the EOS R. I don't have much experience with the RP, so I can't really talk about that. But as far as I'm concerned, the EOS R was the best bang for the buck camera in Canon's lineup. Now, does the R8 dethrone the EOS R as the best bang for the buck camera in Canon's lineup? Now, I never included the EOS RP in this because the RP has a shutter rating of 100,000 shots, whereas the R has 200,000 shots. So if you want to buy a camera that's going to last you a long time, I would think that the R would last longer than the RP because the shutter mechanism is designed to last longer, and obviously you're shooting a ton of shots. So yeah, let's take a look at the R8 versus the R. On the photo side, the R has 30 megapixels, the R8 only has 24, so you should win out in resolution with the R. Now the sensors are different too, because the R8 has the sensor from the 6D Mark II, which is a very nice sensor, but the R has the sensor from the 5D Mark IV. Now, 5D Mark IV was initially released in 2016, which is so long ago, but that 5D Mark IV was designed as a workhorse camera for professional photographers. You had the 1D series, which was Canon's flagship, and then right below was the 5D series. And the sensor in the R comes from the 5D camera, which was the best 5D camera ever made. So, which sensor is better? It's hard to say. One's newer, smaller resolution, one's older, but it's for a professional level workhorse camera. It'd be nice to get the R8 in my hand and test it against the R and just do like a real comparison. Maybe in the future I'll pick up the R8 and we can do that. But let's look at it from a realistic perspective. Who's gonna buy the R? Who's gonna buy the R8? People who are just getting into photography, hobbyists, people who like to travel and shoot. Maybe you want to go for a hike and just want a nice lightweight camera to carry with you. So a lot of these photos are going to be put on Facebook, going to be put on Instagram, social media, that kind of thing. I don't think as a commercial photographer you would buy an R8 or an R, even though you can use them for those applications. I think commercial photographers are probably going to buy more R6s and R5s and R1 when it's finally released. So all things considered, which is the best bang for the buck photo camera? Oh, also, the autofocus on the R8 is better than the R. R is good at tracking eyes. It's always been really like spot on, but the R8 is like super sticky and that box really sticks to everything, which is good. So best bang for the buck because the R8 comes in at a lower price point. I'm gonna give the R8 the win there. I think it's going to be awesome. And it's so light and small and compact. So if you're like a traveler and you just want a nice full frame camera body to carry with you, the weight is going to be perfect. All right, so now let's talk about video specs. There are some slight differences with the cameras. The R8 has IPB and IPB Lite and C-Log 3, whereas the R has IPB and all-eye and C-Log 1. The R8 can shoot C-Log at 10-bit internally. The R can shoot C-Log 10-bit externally to a recorder, like a Ninja recorder on top of the camera. The R8 has the advantage here, I think, because it has 6K oversampled 4K, and it doesn't have that crop in 4K mode. So I would definitely give the win to the R8 here in terms of best bang for the buck video camera that Canon produces. So if you're thinking about buying an R8, I give it a double thumbs up. The R8 is definitely squarely aimed at people who want to get into photography and videography, or into content creation, YouTube, TikTok videos, and things like that. Well, there's one thing I want to gripe about with the R8 too, and I noticed this on the DP review video, is that the microphone jack has moved up towards the center of the frame. So if you're vlogging yourself and you have your camera screen flipped out, the LCD, the mic jack is going to block your view. I don't understand why Canon did this. On the R7, they moved the mic jack and the headphone jack to either side of the LCD screen so it didn't impede your view. So, but I guess without IBIS, you're not really going to use the R8 for filming vlogs. But even like this YouTube stuff, like if you have a video, if you have the LCD out to the side on the R5, it's terrible because you have the mic and the HDMI cable blocking the view. So the R7 is great because it clears the view, and I don't know why Canon took a step backwards there. It was so nice. Anyway, that's a side rant. I don't understand some of the decisions. And speaking of ranting, can like the on-off switch just find a home? Can we just put it someplace and just keep it there? Every camera, it's in a different place, and like, let's just standardize it. And I vote for it being right there by the shutter release button, right at the front. This one-handed operation, pick up the camera, take the shot. But anyway, yes, who's the R8 geared towards? I think amateurs, enthusiasts, travel photographers, travel vloggers, people who want to take really nice full frame photos and just have a nice lightweight compact camera to carry around. And I'm curious to see if the R8 is going to be good for vintage lens photography. As you know, that's one of my passions. I have a big collection of vintage glass, and I love putting it on my camera and going out for walks. And the appealing thing with the R8 is that it's such a small little body, it actually feels like those old vintage cameras. Actually, one thing I will mention, because there was all this talk on the rumors that it has a new form factor, body is gonna look new, I was kind of hoping that the R8 would look like this, and we would have a nice small little compact camera with an RF mount. Like, if we had an R at Canon EOS R5 mini like this, I would totally buy that in a heartbeat. I'd love a nice small compact camera, but I guess the R8 is kind of, it's about this size with a little more of a grip on there. So yeah, I'm curious to see what the R8 will be like for vintage lens photography. But overall, I think the R8 is going to be a fantastic camera for people who are new to photography, want to get into videography, want a good walk around travel camera. We'll see what it's like with vintage lenses. The one disappointment I have with it is the smaller battery, because for people like me who want a second camera as a backup camera, I think I'm going to stick to the EOS R as my secondary camera, because I don't want to carry multiple batteries with me to shoots. If I go to set, if I go to a wedding and I have to carry the regular batteries and the small batteries, it's too much to deal with, and then charging, it's like, it's a mess. So I don't think the R8 is going to be the perfect secondary camera for someone who already has the pro level cameras. But for somebody who wants to get into photography or get into that Canon system, I think, yeah, fantastic. All right, so those are my thoughts. Peace out. Thanks for watching. I will see you guys on another day if the sun ever sets. See ya.